Welcome to Hungry Dads, your guided tour through the delicate and often overwhelming balancing act between food indulgences and social acceptance. And now, as always, here are your hosts, Rod Budget and Hugh Gallen.
What kind of a Thanksgiving dinner is this? Where's the turkey, Chuck? Don't you know anything about Thanksgiving dinners? Where's the mashed potatoes? Where's the cranberry sauce? Where's the pumpkin pie?
Welcome to episode 14 of Hungry Dads. I'm Rod Budget.
I'm Hugh Gallen.
And tonight we are going to do a Thanksgiving wrap-up spectacular. Thanksgiving just occurred. We have a lot of things to say. Did you have a good Thanksgiving, Mr. Gallen? You and the family?
Yeah, certainly. Mrs. Gallen's family came, and it was a great Thanksgiving, and actually one of the more eventful ones on the food front, and I'll get to that in a little bit.
I've been waiting some time for the Thanksgiving wrap-up because I have some pretty strong opinions about Thanksgiving food, and in particular, the traditional main Thanksgiving food, that being turkey. And I'm just going to come out and say it. Turkey is not good. No one really likes turkey. So I'll just justify and further explain my stance, since I'm sure this is going to get some people's feathers ruffled, but let me explain myself. So first of all, this is the most basic argument against turkey. It's not an inherently tasty food. It just isn't. I've never seen anyone cut into a turkey or pick up a piece of turkey, take that first bite, and say, "Oh my, that is just the most amazing thing I've ever tasted." You know what they're going to say if they like it? "Wow, that's juicy," or "Wow, that's a moist bird." And that's very telling, because it's an admission that turkey is usually, or at the very least, often, not moist and dry and flavorless. And this is the point where the turkey aficionados and the turkey defenders are going to chime in with their standard, expected, and exhausting response: "You've never had good turkey." And to that I say, yes, exactly. And that's my point. I've never had good turkey. I've been around for 39 Thanksgivings. I've had turkey at Christmas time, restaurants, catered at work events, and I've never had really good turkey. You'd think at some point I would have gotten some of this amazing turkey that everybody raves about, but I haven't. When it comes down to it, turkey is outdated. It's a tradition that was started about 400 years ago when the Pilgrims came over on the Mayflower, went hunting for some food, and they were able to hunt some wild turkeys and have a feast. And I'm sure it was amazing to them because they were starving and they had this huge bird in front of them. But fast forward to present day, and we're still using turkey as a centerpiece of our meals. I get that there's some tradition involved in giving thanks like the Pilgrims did, using the same food that they ate, which if that's your argument for keeping turkey around, I guess I can buy that. But don't try to convince me that it tastes great. So having said all that, I'll boil this down to 3 main points to support my anti-turkey stance. Number 1, think of all the sides and desserts that have been invented to go along with the Thanksgiving dinner along the way. Stuffing, dressing, cranberry sauce, yams, potatoes of all varieties, vegetables, corn, green bean casserole, pumpkin pie, apple pie, cherry pie, ice cream. I get that we live in a culture of abundance for those who are lucky enough to afford it, but turkey is supposed to be the star of the show, right? It never really is. If it was so great, the amount and diversity of side dishes and desserts would not have expanded to this degree. And even more damning is gravy. Almost everyone loves gravy on their turkey. And gravy is delicious. It's needed for turkey. But I don't see anyone putting gravy on a cheeseburger or steak or a slice of pizza. And what does that say about turkey? Secondly, if you're really being honest with yourself out there, wouldn't you rather have something else to take over the traditional Thanksgiving main course? Ham has already made some significant inroads, a much more flavorful meat and one that I prefer. But why not cheeseburgers or pizza? Or a steak if you want to do a steak? Even turkey burgers if you want to stick some sort of turkey in it. People will argue that turkey is the tradition and it's honoring the Pilgrims and their struggle coming to America. To that I say it's been 400 years. I think we can move on. My third and final point in support of my turkey abolition movement, or TAM, is this. I prepared the turkey this year for the first time in my life, which we'll go into more detail about a little bit later. But this being my first time, I started doing research about a week ago on how to best prepare and cook the bird. And I've got to tell you, Hugh, I have never seen so many varying opinions on the different ways to go about this. It's overwhelming. They're all very strong, passionate opinions. You've got to brine. If you brine, you're an idiot. It doesn't do anything. You've got to baste. Don't ever baste. Put a bunch of herbs and veggies in the turkey's cavity. Only amateurs put those things in the cavity. It won't heat up. Use a dry rub. Use a wet rub. Apply the rub while the turkey thaws. It's ridiculous. I've never seen anything like it. Everyone is fundamentally trying to alter the taste of the turkey with all sorts of rubs and marinades and cooking methods and magic. And no one can agree on the proper approach. Isn't this a pretty telling indictment on turkey? What do you think, Hugh? Am I being too hard on the turkey?
I definitely am going to have some words in defense of the turkey.
Good, because somebody needs to.
Let me speak in defense of the turkey, and I'm not going to dismiss every point you made. But the first thing is, just to set the stage, there's no accounting for taste. That's one thing. But I think you're underselling the value of the tradition. And you can get into, you mentioned back in the first Thanksgiving and that it goes back to that. But I think even more close to people's hearts, it's what is eaten when you're with family. And I think that emotion does affect taste and does affect flavor. And I think that if you're looking at taste just on that pure objective level, you're missing a true emotional aspect of food that people value. Now getting a little bit more direct in the scientific evidence, you mentioned the sides. Those sides are tailored to go well with turkey. Some of them can be a little more universal. Stuffing can be served with many other things, but it goes with the turkey. The gravy goes with the turkey. Cranberries don't go in anything except turkey, and I will argue that they go exceptionally with turkey. And not only do the flavors mix well, but it harkens memories of a special few times of year, which increases the enjoyment. I actually think there will be lots of people who agree with you, including several people in my own household who don't even like the turkey, but it just gets made every year because that's the way it gets done. And there is amongst some a definite sense of animosity towards the turkey itself as just its presence and the preparation and the fact that no one wants it. But I will speak in defense of the turkey, and admittedly it might be mostly an emotional argument, but I don't think that makes it a weak argument.
It is emotional. I mean, I'll give that to you. You hearken on the tradition, which I get. If that's the way you want to go, if you want to live in the past, so be it. I'm just a little bit more of a forward thinker, I think. So, give me a big slice of pizza instead of the turkey. I thought, actually, when you were talking about your first point, you got a little psychological about how it harkens memories of family and being around, which I think is a decent point. I thought you were going to go much more practical in saying you have a lot of people around and turkey's a big bird and there are a lot of parts to it and it feeds a lot of people, which I think is also a viable argument.
If you want the ham, if you want cheeseburgers, that's also fine. I'm not hung up on the turkey, but I will personally say that I will always be having a turkey at my Thanksgiving dinner and my Christmas dinner because that's one of the signals of those holidays for me.
It's not Thanksgiving without the dry turkey.
Hungry Dad!
So, Rod, speaking of the turkey and Thanksgiving, we had a very special Thanksgiving here in the house because we had a turkey as well. But inside that turkey was a chicken and a duck. I don't know if you've heard of it, but I made what's called a turducken, which is a turkey, a duck, and a chicken all in one. Have you heard of this before?
I have heard of the turducken, kind of more of a legend rather than a practical thing that I've tasted or even known anybody to make. But yeah, I can't wait to hear about the turducken.
I want to give you my view on cooking, which perhaps gave me the overconfidence and the cockiness required to try to attempt this feat. My high school driver's ed teacher said one time, I don't understand people who say they can't cook. If you can follow directions, you can cook. So don't try to convince someone that you can't cook. And I listened to that and I said, that makes a lot of sense. Any idiot can follow directions. And if you can follow directions, you can cook anything. And so I've always incorporated that in my thinking to many, many disasters because I sit down with a recipe, I follow what I think of the directions, then I start cheating and getting lazy and I end up with essentially a disaster. So when I decided to take on this turducken, first of all, I thought it would be simpler than it was. Turns out this thing is no joke. Secondly, I wanted to make sure that I was going to do it right and that I would follow these directions because I can spend time in the kitchen, but I'm not a cook. Well, let me tell you, this turducken was no joke. I did 3 and 5 hours of research on the web trying to find the right recipe. And like you said before, there's a million different ways to think about it with the brining, not brining, different strategies. Just the setup and the buildup is a challenge. I had to find 3 birds of the right size, make sure they get thawed. That took some days of preparation. The turducken, it turns out, requires that they all 3 be deboned, which is something I've never done before, and I just figured if I'm going to really do it, it's something I'm going to do myself. You debone the 3 birds, and you layer them, and you cook them. In my research and in my thinking, there were some considerations and some concerns quickly became apparent. First of all, I didn't have all of the equipment I needed. I had to get a new knife, a deboning knife. I had to get some skewers. I had to get some cooking twine. Had to get a pan of the right size. That was easy to solve. I quickly learned that there's major concerns about overcooking versus undercooking, which is basically the difference between having a dry turducken and a poisonous turducken. Of course, I'm cooking this for guests, so I want to make sure it's flavorful. I also want to make sure it's not going to make anybody vomit. I decided to choose a recipe without brining because I wanted to save this potentially time-consuming and difficult and risky step. Probably the most interesting thing I learned about the turducken in my research is that there's a concern about structural integrity of stuffing. There's a lot of controversy and a lot of talk out there about stuffing in a normal turkey, but when you're talking about a turducken, which is, again, a chicken layered with a duck, layered with a turkey, you really are creating a Frankenstein's bird, and the potential for structural problems are apparent. So I finally found a recipe that I really felt like solved all these problems. And I want to give a lot of credit to SeriousEats.com's Food Lab. And they had a recipe that was not like any I'd seen. And what it called for was first that the middle portions, the chicken and the duck, are going to get pre-cooked. You're going to fry the skin on them. And instead of stuffing, you use sausage. This solves the cooking problems, the dryness problem, the potential poisoning problem, and it gives you something, the sausage gives you a strong inside. So armed with this recipe, I started feeling pretty confident. I could try to explain how it went, but I think the best thing I can do is lead our listeners to our website, where I, in fact, videotaped much of the process. I videotaped the deboning. I took some photographs. There's about a 2-minute video showing the whole process.
Yeah, you guys have to check this out. This is an amazing video. You can see a whole turducken being prepared in about 2 minutes.
And in the video, what you'll see is what's essentially about over 3 hours of work boiled down into 2 minutes. It's me wrestling with a couple of birds, getting them deboned, wrapping them up. I wrestled with this raw meat, getting it mushy. This duck was very, very mushy, and you had to cook a section, layer a section, cook a section, layer a section, fry a section, layer a section, and then finally form what looks from the outside like a real turkey. You end up forming it back into the shape of a turkey when it's done, but inside there's no bones. In the middle of the process, I cut my finger pretty good. I quickly grabbed some super glue. I don't know if you ever used this trick with a cut, but you could super glue it right shut, bandaged it, and moved on.
That's like Superman.
Yeah, I had to just deal with it and move on.
Power through, yeah. Yeah, I believe you had an injury in our very first episode as well. This is your second injury of the Hungry Dads era.
That's right. I bit my tongue the day of our very first episode in a separate food incident. So.
And how's the finger doing now? Are you able to manipulate the microphone?
I am. I'm powering through again. I don't think I'm going to start bleeding. I think I'll be okay. So yeah, this turducken was not without peril. Trust me. It was for my in-laws and my family, which I obviously wanted to make it successful, and I wanted to make Thanksgiving. I will say the talk about the turducken and the preparation of the turducken added an excitement to the Thanksgiving that I don't think we felt in a while. So just talking to people about it, explaining it, and being in the kitchen, ripping apart the flesh of 3 different birds, frying up the duck skin, the whole process really added an energy to the house, and it was quite a lot of fun, I have to admit. The final verdict, let me tell you. You can check out the video for yourself, but if I do say so myself, it looked nicer, even nicer than I thought it would. In the end, you had what looked like a perfect turkey with the legs and the wings, a nice browning on the outside. I feel very confident that I pulled off a successful turducken. I followed the recipe. Everything went according to plan. And when I cut it open, it looked like I wanted it to look. It was what I would call a mosaic of birds, of poultry. But I will say, the taste was just okay. After all that work and all that excitement, me personally, I did not think it was a showstopper as far as flavor. Duck, chicken, and turkey, the tastes don't go that well together. I am almost certain that each bird prepared separately would be more delicious than the cramming of them together.
That's interesting. It is a beautiful, beautiful piece of Frankenstein art. I saw it in the video. It looks very nice. It's kind of like a cinnamon roll look, like a swirl of meat. It made me want to try it, but it's good to know that you're giving it the fair assessment of, again, I think these poultry items are not inherently very flavorful.
And then again, the flavors mixed just didn't work for me.
Hungry Dads.
I also was responsible for the bird this year. For the first time, we hosted Thanksgiving with my in-laws, and I prepared just a standard turkey for the first time ever, which, as I alluded to in the opening, there's a lot of different opinions out there. We have a big green egg, for those of you who aren't familiar. That is a Komodo-style smoker/grill that can get up to very hot temperatures and can also smoke things on a low temperature. So I decided to smoke the turkey on a lower setting, which was fairly basic, certainly compared to the turducken story. I went with a dry rub, just some herbs and spices, pretty basic stuff, all over the bird, and sat it on the big green egg for about 4 hours to cook it. But honestly, the most challenging part for me was the fact that despite following all the guidelines on thawing the turkey, I set it in the fridge about 3.5 days prior to cooking for about a 14-pound bird. And when I took it out and unwrapped it, it was still fairly frozen, which I should have known, because we keep our fridge pretty cold. I like my beverages, adult or otherwise, pretty cold, so we keep it around 34 or 35, so I don't think it was thawing that quickly. I mean, it wasn't a rock solid piece of ice, but it definitely still had some ice on it. So I knew that there were giblets or giblets. Do you say giblets or giblets?
I think it's giblets.
Yeah, I don't know.
Could be a regional thing.
I've heard both, but I'm going to say giblets because that's what you think it is. I knew there was a bag of giblets I was picturing just reaching in the cavity and there would be just like a bag there, easily to find and just take it out.
That's what I've experienced before.
Yeah, I didn't realize there were two separate cavities because it was kind of frozen shut, the second cavity. So it looked like there was just one big hole, the main cavity. And the neck was in there, which I didn't know the neck was going to be separate from the rest of the bagged giblets, which makes sense because the neck's a big thing.
The neck doesn't really connect to your guts, but
exactly. I wasn't thinking through the anatomy of the bird, but I knew the neck was going to be in there, but it was frozen to the inner wall of the turkey. So I could kind of see this thing, and I was like, I think that's the neck, but I didn't want to rip out some sort of integral piece of the bird.
A load-bearing piece of
exactly.
Turkey.
I thought the whole turkey was going to collapse on itself. I had to yank on the neck with a lot of force. It was 10 or 15 minutes of trying to get the neck out, and it finally came out. I have a picture of it. I'll put it up on the website. It's pretty entertaining. And then I finally was able to pry open the other cavity after locating it and got the bag of giblets out. So that was the main drama with me. As for smoking it, it went pretty much to plan. The only other real drama, which basically all my drama is just pointing to the fact that I'm not a good cook and kind of a bumbling idiot. I have an electronic meat thermometer that I was using to make sure the bird was getting to 165, and there was a lot going on around me. I was trying to do 4 things at once and accidentally left the thermometer in the bird while I closed the lid of the smoker. And then when I opened it up the next time, obviously, the thermometer was somewhat melted and no longer functioning. But it was right at the end, so I knew it was at 165. None of the thermometer melted into the bird. Nothing was integrated into the meat. So I was able to pull it out with some tongs. It was very hot. It was smoking as it came out. I think overall it was a success for my first time smoking a bird.
Hungry Dads.
So on Thanksgiving meals and holiday meals, let's step away from the turkey for a second and talk about side dishes, or in particular one side dish that came from my family and my mother. And what it is, I'll just come out with it. It was something that was always on our Thanksgiving table. It was lime Jello with pineapples, walnuts inside, and a large dollop of Miracle Whip on top. Rod,
What?
have you ever heard of this?
Wait, Miracle Whip's on top of the Jello?
Yes. I'll say it again so there's no mistake. Jello, a Jello mold in the shape of a ring. Inside the Jello is pineapple and walnuts, and then in the middle of the ring is a healthy dollop of Miracle Whip.
I've definitely heard of Jello with the things floating around in it, but this Miracle Whip thing wow, that's news to me.
The reason I bring it up is because I shared this with a friend of mine before the holidays and got a similar reaction to what you just gave, which was, this doesn't sound right to me. I think you're either lying or perhaps your mother has been playing a trick on you for 20 years of your life as a joke. And I had to wonder, what was this thing? Honestly, I have a taste for it. I'll just come out and say I have a taste for lime Jello with Miracle Whip on it. And I assumed it wasn't perfectly common, but I also hadn't taken it to be completely absurd until I took a few informal polls, including your reaction just now, Rod. So, in response to this, I had to speak with my mother about what this was, whether it was a false memory, a joke, or perhaps my mother is just insane. I covertly recorded my conversation with my mother, and I'd like to play it for our listeners right now.
All right.
Would you like? So I asked my mother about this lime Jello with walnuts, pineapples, and Miracle Whip, and this is what she shared.
It's just a Jello salad with celery and apple stuff in it, and the Miracle Whip was just to make it look pretty.
Okay, so that's my mother saying, kind of, laughing but definitely not acknowledging that there's anything weird about this. So her reaction is, pretty, it's a mom reaction, but she's definitely not overly defensive, nor is she, copying to the fact that this is odd. It's just a Jello salad. And her first answer is that the Miracle Whip is mostly just for appearance's sake. Perhaps it was never meant to be eaten.
Yeah, that's what I noticed. That was my main takeaway.
Unsurprisingly, I'm not satisfied by this answer completely, so I followed up. Where did that come from? Like, where did you get that from?
My mother and grandmother always made it. There's a recipe. Look in the Better Homes and Gardens cookbook.
So, if you could pick that up behind my daughter screaming about wanting water or something. My mother, again, kind of defending her position. This came from she said, just check the Better Homes and Gardens cookbook, which I didn't happen to have a copy around.
Yeah, just check. I'm picturing some giant coffee table book from 1934.
And I have no doubt that my mom just assumes that we have one in our house, because who wouldn't? But we didn't, and I knew we didn't. So I prodded further, because I wanted to get as much information as I could. That flavor combination maybe didn't hit the East Coast or something?
Mom looked up a Jello salad in the cookbook, and that's the one she came up with.
What year do you think that might have been? I'm going to do some research on this. What year if you had to guess a year range of when Graham might have been doing that, looking at those kind of recipes?
1940s.
The 40s? Okay, so a little bit of information upon which I can do some research. And after the conversation, I did do some research, and I'll say this. Even before the conversation, I'd done a little Googling. Jello salad, lime Jello with mayonnaise, there was some precedent for it. Most of the precedent was actually mixing these things together and creating a Jello mold that kind of had a cloudiness to it from the mayonnaise. And I think the connection is, it's a salad. It was pitched as a salad. I saw some, quote, church cookbooks that originated in the Midwest, which is where I'm from, that had mayonnaise and lime Jello particularly. So I'm convinced at this point my mom's at least not in left field here, and I recognize that I have a taste for it, but it's obviously a little bit odd. I didn't stop there though. There's still some. My mom had some more information to share.
You know how Waldorf salad? Well, that's a takeoff on a Waldorf salad.
Okay.
But I mean, she didn't make it up.
Got a little defensive there, it sounds like.
Right. So now she's kind of really, she's invoking a known thing, the Waldorf salad, and saying, well, this is a takeoff on a Waldorf salad. Now, I looked up Waldorf salad, and a Waldorf salad is apples, celery, walnuts over lettuce with a mayonnaise dressing. Again, what I'm talking about here is lime Jello with pineapple, walnuts, and Miracle Whip. So the only real constant ingredient there are the walnuts and arguably the mayonnaise for the Miracle Whip. So
yeah, it's definitely a stretch.
So I appreciate what my mom's trying to do here, but she actually moved further away from credibility with this. We discussed potentially, what happened, where this came from. I remember you didn't used to put carrots and apples in it, maybe because I didn't like it. I remember having walnuts.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, well, you liked the pineapple in it.
Right.
And Graham used to make it with celery and carrots and walnuts.
It obviously was kind of a family evolution of this flavor. One thing my mother had not really gotten clear on is the Miracle Whip thing. So I did ask her about where Miracle Whip came from. Right, but then and it was Miracle Whip. Do you know if it was Miracle Whip originally or like mayonnaise or either? Do you know?
It was probably mayonnaise, I would imagine. Okay. It might not have been anything.
Right.
Because it looked pretty when you put the white and then some paprika on.
Right. Did you catch that end part? What my mom said was the very last thing that she threw in that I'd forgotten about was you put the white Miracle Whip and then it looks pretty when you throw the paprika on it. This is lime Jello with Miracle Whip and, yes, a dash of paprika. I think at this point it's utterly indefensible, but it is a family tradition. I think it evolved from a personal place. I have a taste for it. I haven't been bold enough to insist that my family put it on our Thanksgiving table, but
I think it's high time. Couple of thoughts. It's definitely piqued my interest. I want to try it. I like Miracle Whip. I like lime Jello, so... My other thought is, I think this might be an interesting case of marketing or how products change over time. I think it sounds like this is probably a very old recipe. I'm guessing when Jello was fairly new and maybe Miracle Whip was fairly new. Jello, you hear of Jello salads. I think that's how it was presented when it first came out. It was like kind of a salad, which sounds bizarre now, but that's how people thought of it. Miracle Whip is a salad dressing. When you look even on the label, it says salad dressing, even though no one uses it for that anymore. It's a sandwich spread. So I think maybe just way back then, it was perfectly logical for them to go together. And now, socially, been conditioned to think it's completely absurd.
Yeah, I think you hit on it. This final product that we're talking about today that is so absurd has what I think are reasonable origins, and it is exactly what you said. It's marketing. Back when, I'll just say, back when the housewife was making the weekly shopping list, she was working off of recipes. And the recipes often came from the manufacturers. So you had the Jello people sitting around saying, how are we going to sell this stuff, perhaps beyond just a dessert? We need to make it a side dish. How can we make it a side dish? Well, we need to make it savory instead of sweet. Well, let's start adding some vegetables. Let's add some mayonnaise. The Miracle Whip people see that and say, why can't we have Miracle Whip on the Jello? And so as, our grandmothers were preparing meals for our grandfathers. They were looking for new things to serve, and the Jello people and the Miracle Whip people and the mayonnaise people were printing these recipes in Better Homes and Gardens, literally, for our grandmothers to see. So, and then over time, it evolves.
I bet it's good. I'm sitting here thinking about it, and I bet, not too much Miracle Whip, but a little dollop with a big kind of mouthful of Jello, lime Jello. I think that's going to be tasty. We might have a live taste test coming up in a future episode.
That's not a bad idea.
Hungry Dads! Visit our website at hungrydads.com. Follow us on Twitter at hungry_dads. This has been a Hungry Dads production. I think it's just the most boring mother-son conversation ever. You like the pineapple, Kevin.
Exactly.